Hi, Dawn Summers here with Dawn Summers Fashion Studio, and welcome back. Today we're talking about seam finishes, and for my first group tutorial, I'm going to go over some home sewing techniques for seam finishes. These are different than from the industry, but I just wanted to give you guys that are just sewing for fun or at home, and if you don't have access to different things or want to do some of these special techniques that the industry uses, I'm going to give you and show you some options. So today we're going to go over, all in this one tutorial, some of these different finishes that I'll do individually, but like a pinked edge, a zigzag edge, a bias bound edge, a just turn and stitch edge, and your surged edge, which is also your overlock. So the first one we're going to talk about is a pinked seam finish. So if you're at home and you don't have any other options, you don't have a lot of time, a pinked edge is literally using pinking shears to cut the edge of the seam allowance. So on a normal edge, you can see how it starts to fray, and if you're wearing or launder, it's going to continue to fray. So and here, even this seam here, you can see, I've already stitched this just to save time. You can see he's starting to fray a little bit. So a pinked edge is a certain pair of scissors. I have mine here. I have a pair of Ginger scissors that I bought way back long ago when I was in college. I thought that it was a really important thing to have. You can see how the teeth have the zigzag edge and they're really sharp. Honestly, I don't use them very often. They still are in their box. I use them every once in a while for something kind of cool, but I never use a pinked edge because I have other finishes that I use. But this is an option for you if you don't have any other options. So I've got one side done, and I'm just going to quickly show you. I actually work better from this side. You're just going to just barely take off the edge. So you can see that with the zigzag, it creates that little bit of barrier so that it won't unravel quite so easily or fray. So we get that all done there, kind of move some of our little fringy edges. So there's your pinked edge. So very simple, but you need to stitch your seam first so that you know what seam allowance you would be stitching from. If you cut it off before you stitch, then you'll either have a wavy seam or you won't know exactly what you're looking for or doing. So I'm going to put this back in its case because I won't see it for probably another year. So I'm going to put that away, and the next thing we're going to look at is I'm going to grab and show you a zigzag finish. So every machine has a zigzag option to it. I've already sewed my seam. I believe I did just a 5/8 seam allowance, I don't remember. And then when you do a zigzag, I have one side already done. You're just going to come in from the edge a little bit. This is probably 1/8 of an inch in, and you're just going to run a zigzag stitch down your seam allowance. So you can see the edge is already starting to fray, and it will continue to fray until it gets down, and that stitch will stop the fraying. So on this next side, I might even get just a little bit closer, because the more that frays, it's going to have these little ends that are in the laundry. They'll get on your clothes. They're really annoying. So I'm going to move this over here to my machine that I'm set up, and I'm just going to do the other side for you. We have the black, have my zigzag set up. It may be a little bit different than the width of the other side, but we're just going to stitch along. I'm going to look at it. Yeah, I'm going to get a little closer to the edge. I don't want to go over because then it'll start curling under. That's about right. We don't even need to back stitch when we do this because the next seam will be tucked in another seam as we're sewing, because we're just wanting to finish that. So there, you can see how that worked. If you look really closely, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but there's a little line right there, and I'm telling you what that is because I got pretty close to the edge, it actually tunneled it. So it created a little bit of gather underneath that stitch, which creates a little raised bump. And you really don't want to do that, so that's why you need to kind of stay away from the edge, because that just gives it a little extra thickness in there that you don't want, because you want that perfectly flat, and you don't want to see that or feel that from the right side. So that is our zigzag. The next seam finish that we're going to look at is this one here. I got them out of order a little bit there. I'm just going to go over a turn and stitch edge. So this seam, I've already made the seam, and what you're going to do once you get to this stage is you're going to fold under the little bit of edge, about 1/8 of an inch under. So I'm going to take it over to the ironing board, and I'm going to iron that under. And then I'm going to put a few little pins in it, and then I'm literally going to top stitch it to top stitch it down. So you can see this side that I have already done. So on the back side, it's raw on the edge, but that's okay because it's all tucked under and covered up. And that's what the outer side will look like. We're gonna do, it's called an edge stitch. I started out a little bit wider, and then I decided I was gonna try to get a little closer to the edge. So it's kind of whatever you're comfortable with. You don't wanna drop off the edge, but you don't wanna get it too wide either, because you wanna make sure you catch it in the back. So I'm gonna take my piece of material over, and I'm just going to really quickly tuck under a little more than 1/8, close to 1/4, and I'm just going to press that down, making sure I don't want to get my other seam in there. That's good. And now I'm going to bring it over here to my machine. It's pressed pretty good. I probably don't need a pin, but I'm just gonna put a couple pins in just to hold it down. And I'm gonna move off my zigzag, because we sure don't need a zigzag stitch. And I'm just going to get it as close to the edge as I can, because I want it to look nice. Tuck a little back stitch in there. I'm just gonna truck along. Now when we open this back up, if I can get a hold of it, there we go. Got him a little closer and a little more consistent. I'd just give him a good press job and he would be done. So that is the turn under and edge stitch. So that makes a really nice clean finish if you were doing it for home sewing. Of course, if you matched up your thread color in the white, it would look really nice. I'm doing the black so that you can see the contrast. The next one that we're gonna do is a bias bound seam. I chose pink just because when I was at the fabric store, they didn't have black, and I liked this pink color. So what we're gonna do is I have my seam already sewn. Then I just slip over the seam. So your bias tape, this is a double fold bias tape. So you can see it has a really nice hard fold in it. And if you look at it really closely, here on one side, you can see how the underside is a little bit wider than the top side. And what you're gonna do is we are going to put this shorter side on our top and the little bit wider panel on the bottom. That way when I'm stitching and I stitch really close to the edge, I'm sure gonna catch the bottom side as well. I'm gonna show you really closely what I've done on this one. So I sewed my stitch line really close to the edge. Some sew in the ditch, which is like literally on the seam, but this one I didn't know if I would be able to catch it. You could play with it and see if it works because that puts a really nice line. But I do an okay job at a edge stitch, so I just went ahead and edge stitch it. So when you look underneath, it's all neat and clean as well. So the way we're gonna put this on is I'm gonna turn it so that I can, the way my fingers work better. So I have the longer side, barely longer, but the longer side I'm gonna put underneath, and literally I'm just gonna wrap it along the edge. Get my little trusty pin cushion, because I do need to pin it, because you don't want it to slip where it starts slipping off, or you're not gonna catch it, or it'll get kind of wiggly looking. And we don't want any wiggle in our seams. We wanna look professional and everything clean. So I'm gonna put the few pins in it. And put one more so that it's tucked. If you look, I'm tucking it clear up there to that fold line, and it folds right over, and it's right up there on the edge. Maybe, there you go. So now we have that guy ready to stitch. So we're gonna bring him over here to the machine. We're gonna do a little edge stitch. So I'm going to get my needle placement in. Never start at the very end because sometimes it grabs and then it'll clunk up. So start a little ways in on your stitching. And we're just gonna get going here. And take your pins out soon. I waited a little bit too long on that one because that sometimes will push your seam to where you don't want to be stitching. And we're just gonna stitch this along. Little bit, make sure you keep the end tucked up there. So there is our second side that we stitched, and if I was to open that up to see what the seam looked like, there you go. So that is a nice looking option, and then of course when we're finished up, you can trim the ends to make them even. All of this will be in a seam of the next seam, whether it's a hem that is tucked up like so, which would look really nice as well. So this is your bias binding. This is a double folded bias binding. And for my last technique, I'm gonna show you a serged edge on my serger or an overlock. So we're gonna pause for just a minute and we'll get set back up and we'll show you how to do that finish. Hey, welcome back. We're gonna talk about our last home sewing seam finish now, and that is the overlock that we use a serger. So you can see I have my two pieces cut. I have not sewn them yet because you wanna run the overlock or run it through the serger before you sew your seams together. So I've already done one. I'm gonna just open this as if it was going to be the seam. One thing you wanna make sure you do when you're doing an overlock is you're going to put your material, the top side, on the top of your serger. Because if you look at the difference in the overlock, the back to the front, you can see the V's in the back and the nice overlock. It's smoother looking, nicer looking in the front. So they do look different. So you always want to use, make sure you use the top for the front of the material. So I already have this one done. I'm gonna pick up my material here. This is an old serger. This is an old lightweight industrial Juki. See if I can get him turned on. He's very heavy weight. He's like a heavy machine. I've had this machine for probably 30 years and he sews really well. He does a good job. If you're not familiar with sergers, that's okay. I'm not gonna teach you about a serger today. I'm just gonna show you the seam. This one is set up as it can be a 3-thread or a 4-thread. I'm only using the 3-thread with the one needle today because I just need an overlock. I will show you other techniques when we do the industry techniques with a 4-thread as well. So today we're just using a 3-thread. I have my needle down, or my blade down, and we're just gonna run it through. I'm running the edge of the material along the edge of my line here, so it's not cutting anything off. So I'm not changing what my seam allowance would be. I'm gonna clip him off there. It did trim just a little bit. You can see a few little frayed edges that were kind of sticking out, so that's what's nice about it. It looks like I have a little bit of a skip in my stitching, which is fine. I'll have it looked at someday, but for what we're doing with this overlock, it's fine. So this is the top side of both. I'm going to show you the difference in the look between the back side and the top side. Now we're ready to sew the two seams together. So as we sew, like always, we sew right sides together. So I'm just going to move this over to the edge, and we are going to, I'm not even going to pin it. I'm just going to come in and I'm going to go ahead and sew at 5/8 because we're sewing mainly at 5/8 today. So I'm going to move this over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch him down at the 5/8. Make sure I'm lined up. You can use pins at this point. No matter what you're sewing, you'll probably want to use pins, but I have such a small sample here, I'm just going to sew it. So there we have our stitch line. We have sewn right sides together. We have our overlock. Now the last step is to press the seams open. So we're going to bring it over here to our iron and ironing board, open that up, and we're going to stitch that flat. Make sure you open it clear up so it's flat. And a good hard press. I like to turn them over and kind of look at them and give them a press on the outside too. Looks nice. So there is your finished seam with overlock. This is probably the most professional looking one besides your bias bound because the industry uses this technique a lot as well. So now to finish up this home sewing seam finish tutorial, we're going to move back over here, and I have set all of these up on black cardstock, and I've written on each cardstock what the finish is, and I went ahead at the bottom of each of these for home sewing techniques, and we're going to put them in a techniques notebook at the end of our tutorials today. So come back and we will do the tutorials for the industry in just a minute. Thank you.